Pam Bondi was never one to back down from a fight. As the United States Attorney General under President Donald Trump, she had built a reputation for being relentless in her pursuit of justice. Corrupt politicians, white-collar criminals, and power-hungry officials had all fallen before her courtroom prowess. But this case was different. Sitting at her desk in the Justice Department's headquarters in Washington, D.C., she flipped through a thick file filled with evidence. The target? Judge Raymond Caldwell, a respected federal judge known for his influence and deep political connections. On the surface, Caldwell was the picture of judicial excellence. Decades of experience, a spotless record, and the kind of charisma that made jurors hang on his every word. But beneath that polished exterior was a web of corruption that had been growing for years. Insider information, bribery, case manipulation. Caldwell had ensured favorable rulings for select individuals in exchange for vast sums of money, and he had covered his tracks masterfully. The case against him had been built in secrecy, gathering testimonies from whistleblowers, banking records, and wiretaps that exposed his illicit dealings. And now Pam Bondi had him cornered. Tomorrow morning, she would step into the courtroom to expose him before the nation. She had prepared every word of her argument, every piece of evidence, and had ensured her legal team was ready for battle. But something in her gut told her this wouldn't be easy. There were too many powerful people protecting Caldwell. People who would do anything to stop the truth from coming out. As she closed the file, her phone buzzed. It was Detective Mark Henderson, one of her most trusted allies in the case. "Pam, I don't like this." Henderson's deep voice came through the line. "We got word that Caldwell's people are nervous. If this goes to trial, they might try to stop it by any means necessary." Pam exhaled sharply. She had expected this. Corrupt men never went down without a fight. "Let them try, Mark," she said firmly. "We have the evidence. Tomorrow, the whole country will see the truth." She ended the call, but the unease in her stomach didn't fade. Tomorrow was going to be a battle, and she had no idea just how explosive it was going to get. The next morning, the air in the federal district court in Washington, D.C. was thick with anticipation. The media had gathered in full force, their cameras flashing as Pam Bondi stepped out of her black SUV and strode confidently toward the courthouse entrance. She could hear reporters shouting questions. "Attorney General Bondi, do you really have evidence against Judge Caldwell? Is this case politically motivated? Do you think you can win against such a powerful man?" She didn't stop to answer. She didn't need to. The evidence would speak for itself. Inside, the tension was even heavier. The courtroom was packed not just with legal teams and journalists, but with government officials, high-profile attorneys, and even some members of Congress. This was more than just a case, it was a reckoning. At the front of the room, Judge Raymond Caldwell sat confidently in his black robe, a smirk barely hidden on his face. Pam had seen that expression before, the look of a man who believed he was untouchable. As she took her seat at the prosecution table, her team gave her a series of brief nods. Everything was in place. It was time. The bailiff called the court to order, and the proceedings began. The defense wasted no time painting Pam as an overzealous prosecutor, a political pawn looking to bring down a respected judge for her own ambitions. Pam sat quietly, waiting for her turn. When it finally came, she stood up, walked to the center of the courtroom, and faced the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "we are gathered here today to determine whether a man sworn to uphold the law has, in fact, been violating it for years. And I assure you, the evidence will show that he has." She turned slightly, locking eyes with Caldwell. For the first time, his smirk faltered. Pam lifted a manila folder from the table and pulled out the first piece of evidence. "This," she said, holding up a printed bank transaction record, "is a payment of $250,000 made to a Cayman Islands account linked to Judge Caldwell. This transaction took place just days before he ruled in favor of a major pharmaceutical company facing a billion-dollar lawsuit." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. She continued. "And this," she said, holding up a document, "is a transcript of a wiretap conversation. You will hear Judge Caldwell himself discussing the amount he expects to receive for his rulings." The defense immediately objected, but the judge presiding over the case, a no-nonsense, straight-arrow federal judge named Patricia Reynolds, overruled them. The audio recording was played for the jury. The courtroom went silent as Caldwell's own voice filled the air. "Make sure the money is in the account before the ruling. I don't do favors for free." The reaction was instant: gasps, whispers, even some reporters frantically typing on their phones. Pam glanced at Caldwell again. This time, the smirk was gone. His face had paled. But she wasn't finished yet. "And finally," she said, pulling out one last piece of evidence, "we have the testimony of a key witness, someone who was part of this bribery scheme and is ready to tell the truth today." The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. In walked Detective Mark Henderson, escorting a nervous-looking man in a suit. Pam turned to the jury. "This is Thomas Gallagher, a former financial consultant who handled the offshore accounts for Judge Caldwell. And today, he's going to tell you everything." The courtroom erupted in chaos as the defense scrambled to stop the testimony. But it was too late. Pam had just shattered Caldwell's defense. The courtroom was electric with tension as Thomas Gallagher took the stand. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone, his eyes darting nervously toward Judge Raymond Caldwell, who now sat stiffly in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his seat. Pam Bondi wasted no time. She approached the witness stand, her expression calm but determined. "Mr. Gallagher, can you please state your occupation?" The man cleared his throat. "I was a financial consultant specializing in offshore banking and corporate accounts." "And in that role, did you have dealings with Judge Caldwell?" A deep breath. Then the words that changed everything. "Yes. I was responsible for transferring bribe money into offshore accounts for him." A loud gasp rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney immediately jumped up. "Objection. This is hearsay." Judge Patricia Reynolds raised a hand. "Overruled. The witness will continue." Pam nodded at Gallagher, encouraging him to go on. "Tell us, Mr. Gallagher, how exactly did these transactions work?" He shifted in his seat, gathering his thoughts. "Judge Caldwell had accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, hidden under shell corporations. Anytime a company or individual wanted a favorable ruling, I was instructed to coordinate the transfer of funds. The money would be deposited through third parties to make it untraceable." Pam picked up a document from her table and handed it to him. "Is this one of the records of those transactions?" Gallagher examined it and nodded. "Yes. This is a wire transfer from a corporate law firm representing a pharmaceutical company, one of many transactions I processed." Pam turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this document shows a direct payment of $500,000 to one of Judge Caldwell's offshore accounts. The ruling in that case went in favor of the company despite overwhelming evidence that they were guilty of price fixing and fraud." Judge Caldwell shifted in his chair. His face had turned a shade of red and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead. But Pam wasn't done yet. "Mr. Gallagher, did you ever meet with Judge Caldwell personally regarding these bribes?" Gallagher hesitated for a moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Yes. Once. In his chambers." A stunned silence filled the room. Even Caldwell, who had tried to remain composed, couldn't hide the look of shock on his face. Pam took a step closer. "And what did he say to you?" Gallagher swallowed hard. "He told me, as long as the money keeps flowing, the rulings will stay in your favor. But if anyone talks, I'll make sure they regret it." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to take notes, people whispered furiously, and even Judge Reynolds had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. But one person wasn't moving. Judge Caldwell. He sat motionless, staring straight ahead, his face ashen. He knew his game was up. Pam turned back to Gallagher. "Do you fear for your life by testifying today?" Gallagher's lips pressed together before he nodded. "Yes. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent any longer." Pam gave him a reassuring look before turning back to the jury. "This is what corruption looks like. But today we fight back." Judge Caldwell finally moved to whisper something to his lawyer. Pam saw it, and she knew he was getting desperate. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. Judge Caldwell's once confident posture had vanished. His hands were shaking, his lips pressed into a thin line. The truth was out. Pam Bondi could see the fear creeping into his eyes. He knew what was coming. But corrupt men didn't go down without a fight. Judge Caldwell leaned toward his defense attorney, whispering furiously. The lawyer's face paled and he immediately stood. "Your Honor, the defense moves for an immediate mistrial." A loud murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge, Patricia Reynolds, looked unimpressed. "On what grounds?" she asked sternly. The defense attorney cleared his throat. "This case has been tainted with bias and political motivation. The prosecution has overstepped ethical boundaries by intimidating witnesses." Pam shot up from her seat. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is grasping at straws." Every piece of evidence presented today has been legally obtained and the testimony given is under oath. Judge Reynolds narrowed her eyes at Caldwell's lawyer. Motion for a mistrial is denied. Pam smirked. Checkmate. Caldwell's face turned a deep shade of red. He was losing control. Pam turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is undeniable. Judge Caldwell abused his position of power to enrich himself, selling justice to the highest bidder. If this corruption is allowed to go unpunished, then what does the law even stand for? She paused, letting the words sink in. Today you have the power to send a message. No one, not even a federal judge, is above the law. Silence filled the room. The jury members exchanged glances. They knew what they had to do. But before the trial could move forward, something unexpected happened. Judge Caldwell stood up. His entire body was shaking. This is a witch hunt, he roared, slamming his hands on the table. I am a respected judge. You think you can bring me down with lies? The courtroom fell into chaos. Reporters scrambled to capture the scene. Security guards moved closer, ready to intervene. Pam stayed calm. Judge Caldwell, do you deny that the offshore accounts belong to you? She asked, her voice unwavering. Caldwell's eyes darted around the room. He was cornered. Then, to everyone's shock, he made his move. He turned and ran. Right there in the middle of the courtroom, Judge Caldwell bolted toward the exit, pushing past a security officer. Gasps filled the room. Journalists jumped out of the way as the disgraced judge raced toward the door, his robe flowing behind him. But he didn't get far. 2 federal agents stationed at the entrance stepped in his path. They tackled him to the ground. A stunned silence followed. Caldwell struggled, his face pressed against the cold floor. You can't do this to me. I'm a judge. Ayo. Click. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the courtroom. Pam Bondi stepped forward, looking down at him. Not anymore. Cameras flashed. The nation was watching. Justice had been served. And Pam Bondi had taken down one of the most powerful corrupt figures in America. The image of Judge Raymond Caldwell face down on the courtroom floor, his wrists shackled in handcuffs, was plastered across every major news outlet in the country. Corrupt judge caught in courtroom meltdown. Pam Bondi exposes Judge Caldwell, handcuffed minutes later. Justice served, a federal judge falls from grace. Within hours, the video of Caldwell's attempted escape had gone viral. The American public watched in shock, disbelief, and satisfaction as a once powerful judge was taken down by the very system he had manipulated for years. Pam Bondi, however, had little time to bask in victory. As she stepped out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed her. Attorney General Bondi. How does it feel to take down a corrupt judge? What does this mean for the future of the justice system? Do you expect more arrests to follow? Pam raised a hand, signaling for silence. This case was never about me, she said firmly, but about restoring faith in our legal system. Today, we proved that no one, not even a federal judge, is above the law. Justice must be blind to power, wealth, and influence. And I promise you, this is just the beginning. The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering her on, others shouting questions. But Pam didn't stick around. There was still work to be done. Behind bars. Meanwhile, Judge Caldwell sat in a cold, gray cell at a federal detention center, his once pristine robe replaced with an orange jumpsuit. His mind raced. How did it come to this? For years, he had controlled the courtroom, making and breaking corporations with a single ruling. He had been untouchable. Yeah? Now, he was just another prisoner awaiting trial. His lawyer had already contacted him, urging him to take a plea deal. But Caldwell wasn't ready to give up. They can't do this to me, he muttered under his breath, his hands clenched into fists. I made them. I made all of them. Yet deep down, he knew the truth. Pam Bondi had destroyed him. And there was no coming back from this. The ripple effect. The fall of Judge Caldwell sent shockwaves through the legal and political worlds. Investigations were launched into other judges, lawyers, and corporate executives suspected of bribery and corruption. Pam's office received hundreds of tips from whistleblowers, people who had been too afraid to speak before but now saw a chance for justice. The American people demanded more accountability. Protesters gathered outside courthouses, chanting, "Clean the courts! Judges are not above the law. More arrests now." Pam knew this was only the beginning. Caldwell was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. She called an emergency meeting with her team. "We're going after everyone involved in this network. No more backroom deals. No more selling justice. This ends now." Her team nodded, their faces determined. Pam Bondi had just declared war on corruption. And she wasn't stopping until every last guilty party was behind bars. The final verdict. Months later, in a high-security federal courtroom, Judge Caldwell sat across from Pam Bondi one last time. This time, he wasn't wearing a robe. He was in handcuffs, dressed in an orange jumpsuit. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning their verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Raymond Caldwell, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Pam Bondi stood tall, watching as the disgraced judge was escorted out by federal marshals. Justice had finally been served, and America had witnessed the power of the law when placed in the right hands.